Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes here. Give everyone a chance to get connected to this afternoon's webinar. Welcome, everyone. We'll give everyone a few more seconds to get connected, and then we'll get moving. All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar on the recently released report, Building an EV Workforce, a review of Southeast Transportation Electrification Workforce Development Training Programs. We are joined by Trey Gowdy, Research Lead at the Energy Data Analytics Lab at Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability, who will lead today's presentation. We will have some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, so feel free to either save your questions for the end or put them in the Q&A box and we'll address them after the presentation. But first, I'll provide kind of a brief overview of the NASEO, AASHTO, and Joint Office partnership, which was kind of the impetus to some of this research. So in February 2022, about 2 years ago, NASEO, AASHTO, and the U.S. Joint Office of Energy and Transportation signed a memorandum of understanding to provide a framework of collaboration between key state agencies, such as state energy offices and state DOTs, to provide technical assistance to states on EV charging station planning and deployment through both the NEVI program, the Charging and Fueling and Infrastructure program, and other major EV infrastructure investments. So over the last 2 years, NASEO and AASHTO have been convening state agencies in person and online to troubleshoot challenges and identify solutions to NEVI implementation and other EV charging planning efforts, exchanging ideas, and hearing from outside experts on the various challenges of building and planning a national EV charging network. So one of the challenges identified early on in these conversations was around building a skilled and diverse workforce to install, operate, and maintain EV charging equipment, as well as other jobs to support the growing EV industry. So our first order of business was to really understand the existing workforce development programs related to transportation electrification. So we thought the Southeast would be a great place to start, given the historical level of investment in EV manufacturing in that region. So we worked closely with Duke University's Nicholas Institute on compiling a report that really outlines the EV workforce training programs in the Southeast. So I'm excited to hand it over to Trey, who is the lead author on this report, to take it from here.
Thank you, Delaney, and great to be here this afternoon with everybody. As mentioned, I'm Trey Gowdy with Duke University Nicholas Institute. I'll quickly just give a quick overview of the Nicholas Institute. We are an interdisciplinary hub at Duke University working to conduct research, education, and convening around environmental and climate issues. And so this effort is one of many efforts underway at the Nicholas Institute on those topics. So to dive into the report, as Delaney mentioned, was recently released and is available on the NASEO website, as well as a full data set of the programs that I'll talk about today. That is a downloadable Excel file that is available resource. What we wanted to do is create a substantive inventory of programs, from certificate programs, full degree programs, as well as courses at colleges and universities focused on electric vehicles across the Southeast. Our study looked at 10 states in the region, and we primarily looked at 3 academic categories with an additional category serving as a miscellaneous category. There are a number of special efforts in this space. And so we looked at manufacturing, automotive service technology, as well as infrastructure, electrical systems, and related programs. And so we organized this study with those key categories in mind. And essentially what we did is looked at around between 400 and 500 universities in the Southeast and did a manual logging of of the programs that existed at these schools. And so we looked at programs and schools with schools over 1,000 students in those 10 states in the region. And looking at those 4 categories that I mentioned, we organized programs in different academic categories into these main batches. And so just to use manufacturing as an example, where there were schools that were within our region of over 1,000 students, if they had a program around mechanical engineering, mechatronics, welding, or similar programs, we marked that as a potential for an EV program. If those programs actually clearly called out an electric vehicle component, then we marked that as yes in our inventory, and we carried that throughout the rest of the categories and academic programs that you see here. I'll quickly touch on the category at the far right, workforce development consortia and special programs. Those are efforts that may not be a specific degree program or course, but rather a larger collaboration led by a university, often working with other universities in the state or other partners across sectors to advance some component of workforce development in the EV space. And so what I'll do today is walk through each of these 4 categories and highlight the results that we saw in each of those. So starting with manufacturing, we found 17 programs in the Southeast related to manufacturing with a specific EV component. And dots marked in yellow on this map are programs marked as potential. So those are programs that are mechanical engineering, mechatronics, for example, programs that, again, don't have a specific EV component, but may have the capability to expand to an EV specialization in the future. But focusing on the 17 programs that do exist in the region, programs or courses related to manufacturing for electric vehicles, I wanted to highlight a few examples. One, for example, is at Savannah Technical College in Georgia. There's a recently announced EV professional technical certificate of credit in partnership with Hyundai, who is building a manufacturing facility in that area. And that is a special job skills training program for EVs in that area. And there are examples of this throughout the region. Also just highlight, as you see on the screen here, there is a Bachelor of Science in Automotive Engineering program at Clemson University. On its own, that type of program is, I believe, one of the only of its kind in the United States. And in addition, there is also an EV focus as part of the curricula of that program. And so there are examples of programs across the region for EV manufacturing. I will note that you will see some geographical gaps on this map, and I think that is important to note, but I think it's also important to add the caveat that there is not necessarily EV manufacturing in every corner of the region. And often where we see these programs are in connection with a local manufacturing facility, a major employer there that is often partnering with one of these universities, state colleges, technical colleges. And so now moving over to EV automotive service, this is essentially training labor for the maintenance of electric vehicles. This is the category of the three academic categories that had the highest number of existing programs to date. So we found 30 existing programs across the region with a specific EV component. And you can see there's over 100 of other example automotive service type programs that may not have an EV component today, but have at least the foundation for possibly adding that as a specialization or an additional course or more in those programs. And so I wanted to highlight, again, a few examples here. So at Elizabethtown Community College in Kentucky, there is a hybrid and EV technician certificate program. And there are other programs, as you can see on the map in Kentucky, essentially following a similar curricula. In Charlotte, they're at Central Piedmont Community College. There's also a Tesla Start program. One of 2 in the region. There's also a program for Tesla specifically at Miami-Dade College in Florida. And there are multiple other programs in the region that have specializations for specific automakers from Ford and others. There are also programs that are not specific to a specific automaker, and rather talk more generically and more broadly about EV components. I did want to note that there are, as you can see on the map here, there are states that have more than one program in this area. That includes North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, and Florida, with North Carolina having the highest concentration of existing programs to date with 10 programs, and Georgia and Kentucky each having 5 programs in this space. I think this is an area where we do actually, I think, really want to pay attention to some geographical gaps on the map, given that EVs will be on the road, more and more throughout the region. And I think seeing more training programs for EV automotive maintenance and service across the region would be a great improvement. I think we have a better sense now of where some of those gaps are in the region. And so I'm moving over to EV infrastructure and electrical systems, essentially focused on the installation of electric vehicle charging station. This is a little bit of a trickier category to match programs to. As you can see, there are fewer example programs in the region. We found 13, and mainly a lot of those are actually not full-fledged programs, but specific courses in this space. And I think it's also important to note that it's not necessarily critical to only have a university or college academic program in this space. There are apprenticeship programs and other add-on programs outside of the university space that could be a way to specialize for skills for example, electricians who may learn at a community college and then could learn additional skills in the EV space through programs like the EV ITP referenced here on screen. I will note that there are some programs that are examples to highlight. At Columbia Southern University in Alabama, there is an online continuing education course around EV charging station fundamental. And at Wake Tech Community College, just outside of Raleigh in North Carolina, as part of their electrical systems technology program, they are adding EV instruction to that program as part of many aspects of that program. And so finally, moving over to sort of our miscellaneous category, this is essentially programs of a different sort, looking at how to more broadly advance workforce development in their states on electric vehicles. And so this again is broader, almost research or special efforts around advancing workforce development. So for example, this includes the Magnet Project at the University of Alabama and partners in Mississippi and Georgia, working with university and utility and other partners to advance a domestic electric vehicle supply chain in those 3 states. And EV workforce development is part of that special effort. At the University of Mississippi, there is also a co-op and internship program for manufacturing for students. And so while that's not learning that's happening within the university, is an existing partnership for students to get skills at a local employer, I believe the Nissan facility in that area. And I think a key takeaway to note here is that there is, at least in our 10-state scope of this project, there is at least one effort in each of the 10 states that falls into this category. And oftentimes these are at 4-year universities. And so I think this is a great place, and again, to use the word foundation, a foundation for additional efforts that may be unique or needed in particular states to build upon. So I think that's a key takeaway here, that there are programs of this sort advancing EV workforce development to some degree in each of the 10 states in our region. And so just to summarize here, I think to reiterate that point, there are programs in the special category or miscellaneous category across the region in each state, as well as more broadly, of the 4 categories that I talked about, there are programs in each of those across the region to some degree. So maybe not in a certain state, but maybe in a neighboring state that we all could learn from to look at their curricula or the types of training that those programs are taking on. To bring up again the idea that there are some geographical gaps in specific program types. For example, automotive service training, although that was the category we saw the highest number of programs. I think that's also an area where we would likely want to see more coverage across the region as more EVs are on the road. However, there is clearly an existing foundation of programs from existing auto service programs, electrician programs, welding, manufacturing, at state and community and technical colleges, often two-year colleges that can serve, again, as a foundation for adding those specializations. And to do so, I think partnerships with local employers to add maybe a special certificate or even a multi-week specialization for students is an option, like that example I highlighted earlier at Savannah Technical College in Georgia, as well as standards organizations. Automotive Service Excellence is rolling out electric vehicle curricula and parts of existing ASE certified programs, and many of the auto service programs in the region are already ASE certified, and so potentially adopting some of those new programs could be a pathway to see greater coverage in that phase. And so I'll just end here, kind of summarizing the four categories again, and just to highlight again on EV manufacturing. We have 5 states in the region that have more than one program, and so there's a wealth of resources there of existing models of these types of programs. Again, on automotive service, we have another 5 states in the region that have 2 programs or more, and I think those are examples that states or schools that don't have programs today could lean on to see those as potential models. The third category here is the one that I noted is somewhat the trickiest to necessarily always align an academic program to EV infrastructure, but we do see example programs in the space. And although it wasn't part of our scope, I think part of this space could rely on non-academic apprenticeships and special training programs that could add on existing skills for electricians. I'll also note for EV infrastructure and electrical systems, we did not look at the maintenance of the systems in the sense of the software side, and that is another area where I think additional training and additional concentration in both the academic space and in public and private sectors could look at. And final point here is on EV consortia and special programs. There is at least one of those programs in each of the 10 states in the region. And I think that is a great place for us to start and to build from. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Trey. As I mentioned earlier, feel free to use the Q&A box for questions, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to ask your question out loud. Many of you have asked if we will send the slides out afterwards. We will be able to do that, as well as the recording. Once we get that process, we can send that out to you all. And of course, individuals that were unable to make it can view the recording as well. All right. Have NEVI funds been used for any of these programs?
It's a great question. Not that I'm aware of, but I will note in the report, we do summarize text from a lot of the NEVI plans in the region where there is discussion around electric vehicle workforce development. And so I think that is something, yes, to pay attention to in future updates of the NEVI plans. They may have used funding, but not to my knowledge.
Great. And Beth has a question. Is there a reason electrician registered apprenticeship programs through unions were not reviewed?
Just a matter of prioritizing time. I think it is a key aspect of this space, and additional research to complement the existing academic framework, I think, would be very beneficial. And so I would like to see that done as well. And I think that is a key piece of this. And to your question, it is one of the more unique categories, and I think apprenticeships could be a way to add training in that space outside of just the university model.
Next question, did you look at charger O&M training?
Not directly, sort of a similar response there, that this study was mainly focused just on the existing university and college landscape, but I think those are additional resources that do exist out there that could serve as a key part of the puzzle for workforce development.
All right, and then where have you seen emergency responders training occurring?
That's a great question. Although we didn't look at it fully in our study, there are examples that I've seen at Clean Cities coalitions of emergency response training, as well as some continuing education courses. I know there's an example in North Carolina at a community college. And I think there are, although it wasn't part of the inventory, just given the categories we looked at, there are fire colleges in many states in the Southeast. And that is a place where I think emergency response, first responder training could also be a potential thing for further research and further review.
Great. Well, we have a few minutes left, so definitely feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A box, or like I said, raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask your question. Oh, got another one. Outside of the Tesla program you identified, are there any EV maintenance training programs available through automotive brands, or is it mostly training brand agnostic? Good question there.
That is a good question. There are programs. I'm aware of something called the Ford Asset Program. There were some examples of that in the region. There may be also some GM specific training. So there are examples outside of Tesla of automaker specific training, but at large, I would say, I don't know the exact percentage, but a good number of those 30 existing programs for automotive service were brand agnostic. And so I think we have examples of both models there. And those details are noted in the full inventory. And so if you're looking at that specific category in the description there, it will note whether it's a Ford Asset or Tesla Start, or it won't mention a specific brand if that's something you're interested in.
I have a question. Was there any training program specific to medium and heavy duty vehicles that you saw, or is it more just kind of the electric vehicle in general?
It's a good point. I didn't identify any that specifically mentioned medium and heavy duty, but part of the sort of the potential label in that automotive service training category were places that had, for example, diesel equipment repair programs. And so there is an existing, again, foundation of sort of those medium and heavy duty types of training programs for internal combustion vehicles, but didn't see any specific to electric vehicles.
Great. How are the programs being funded?
Likely varies between different states and different programs. I think oftentimes I've seen that programs are just part of the curricula, so it's probably this is an assumption, but potentially just part of the standard academic model for a lot of these colleges. As I mentioned, there are examples of some particular partnerships with local employers, so that may be another method of funding, but it would likely be best to look at some of the specific programs to determine how they are being funded. But on funding, I will note, I think a challenge that likely some emerging programs have is purchasing new equipment for building up a program. And so I think that's something to keep in mind too, is likely these programs, as they're starting up, they will be, needing to have a new vehicle, new as in new to that university or school, to train on. So I think that is part of the upstart cost of these programs, is actually having not only the curricula and the staffing built out, but also the equipment itself, the vehicle or vehicles themselves on site for training.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know also buying the charging infrastructure can be kind of an expensive area to use for training purposes as well.
Right.
All right, looks like we have another question. Aside from the workforce development programs for EV infrastructure development, are there studies to demonstrate how this model also supports social impact and improving community access to transportation as a key social driver of health?
I think it's a terrific question. I'm not aware of any studies to date, but I think I would be very interested to see research, particularly at the local level, of the economic impacts of new manufacturing facilities and entering those areas. As we've seen, substantial EV workforce development, or excuse me, EV manufacturing investments in the Southeast. I think one resource maybe to get that started that I'll point to is the EV Jobs Hub from Atlas Public Policy. That is an interactive map of recently announced electric vehicle, and I think some other energy-specific manufacturing facilities. That could be a way to at least start to see where are these investments happening in the region, and ultimately maybe try to look at that longer term as those facilities get built out. So that's a resource I would mention, at least to maybe pinpoint for specific cities, regions, metropolitan areas.
Oh,
and I'd be happy to share that.
The link in the chat.
Absolutely.
Yes, of course. All right. Well, it looks like we are dying down on some of the questions here. So want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend this webinar today. Thanks again to Trey for the great presentation and for the great discussion. Looks like Jesse put the link to the Atlas resource in the chat. And as Trey mentioned, the publication is available on NASEO's website for you to review if you haven't had a chance to review it. And we will send over the slides as well as the recording for you all to view later. But thank you again for attending, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.